Hello everyone and welcome to episode 30 of the Layton Fitness podcast. So in today's episode we're going to be discussing two different variations of the squat, the high bar squat and the low bar squat. In addition to this, we're also going to discuss briefly a couple of items of equipment that I would suggest potentially investing in if you're a relatively keen lifter. So it's important to know when we discuss the high bar and the low bar squat within this podcast episode, we're mainly discussing the pros and the cons of each. And if you want to learn more about the technique and the specifics of the application of the two lifts, I'd suggest just type the name into YouTube, and there's lots of good exercise demonstration videos. However, it's quite difficult to do that on a podcast, so more just discussing the pros and cons of each and how to potentially best choose which option would be more suitable for you as a trainer. So as discussed on pretty much all my other podcasts, context is so key even when it comes to exercise selection. So the individual will dictate which option will be best for them. It can depend on so many different factors. So it's first important to know briefly the differences between the two. So high bar squat, essentially the bar position is going to be a little bit higher, it's basically going to be at the top of the traps, whereas a low bar squat, the bar position is going to be on top of the rear delts, and essentially you can pull your elbows back and you're going to create a shelf on top of the rear delts. So there's only a slight difference in terms of bar position, but as you'll see in a second, this dramatically changes the actual movement. So with this high bar squat, we're mainly moving relatively straight up and straight down within the movement, whereas the low bar squat, there's a much greater forward lean with the torso. As a general rule, due to this torso lean, you don't need as greater ankle mobility for the low bar squat to meet depth in comparison to the high bar squat. And typically there's going to be a little bit more quad engagement with the high bar squat. However, with the low bar squat, typically you're going to be able to move more weight. This is mainly due to your posterior chain being much more engaged, your lower back, glutes, hamstrings, etc. And this typically is the choice of a powerlifter, the low bar position. However, it's not to say that you won't get some excellent powerlifters that use the high bar squat. And my suggestion initially before we move on would be to actually try both. I personally low bar squat, a lot of my clients low bar squat as well, just because typically they are much stronger. However, I'd give both a try. Like I said, go on YouTube, find a good exercise demonstration tutorial, go through both and start practicing either or and seeing which one you prefer, because both have got pros and cons. Now with regards to the high bar squat, due to less posterior chain activation, this probably is a good indication that it would be worth supplementing with more posterior chain exercises in addition to the high bar squat. So things like deadlifts, hyperextensions, good mornings, things like that probably are worth adding into your routine if you're doing the high bar squat. Whereas with the low bar squat, because like I mentioned, your lower back, hips, glutes are so much more engaged. That's not to say that any additional posterior chain work is necessary, but there isn't as much of a need as if the high bar squat is the main squat movement within your exercise program. Now typically the high bar squat tends to be more suitable for people engaged in sports. For example, if you're doing any jumping movements, the high bar squat mirrors this movement, which is much more transferable. Now which is best for you? Again, it's going to depend. If you're a powerlifter, for the most part the low bar squat is probably going to be the best option. If you're a physique athlete, I would actually try both. Try the low bar and the high bar and see which one you prefer. For a beginner, it really depends. In most situations, I'll suggest the high bar. However, if you were to practice the low bar first as your main primary squat movement, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. My suggestion would be though to try both. Look online, find a couple of good tutorial videos and start practicing both. Now before we leave this episode, I want to briefly discuss squat equipment. I really do strongly suggest investing in some squat shoes. So if you Google these, you can find them online. They are relatively expensive, but they make a significant difference. The main reason being they've got a raised heel, so ultimately it's allow you to meet depth without having to need as much ankle mobility. There's no air in the sole, so for example with a running shoe, there's going to be all that compressed air because this is obviously useful for running, whereas squats, we want that base as stable as possible. You'll just generally feel better in the squat, you'll feel more stable, and like I said, you're certainly going to be able to squat deeper with the squat shoes. So certainly look up online. Usually it's going to be anywhere between £100 and maybe £200. They're not cheap. However, the second point I was going to make is a weightlifting belt. The reason why this can be very useful is this can help improve intra-abdominal pressure. Ultimately, you can improve bracing your core by wearing a belt because you have something to push against. It has a really great feeling when you're doing the squats with a belt compared to without one because of that greater feeling of pushing your abs up against the belt. There's a unique feeling about that, and you certainly feel more stable, and you obviously will be more stable just with that belt wrapped right across your core. But without question, in most situations, you'll be stronger with a belt than without. So again, I think I actually bought mine from the strength shop. If you Google that, the belt I've got is mirrored on the IFYM belt, which is probably one of the best belts in America. However, due to the postage being extortionate, I've bought the UK version, which is a replica. So both of those are worth looking at. So hopefully this has been useful, giving you a few pros and cons of both the high bar and low bar. Both have their place. Let your preference and context dictate application. Find a good couple of tutorial videos, practice it in the gym, and start making progress. So those who are unaware of a low bar squat prior to this podcast, I really recommend taking a look at it and potentially trying it, because most of the time you'll be stronger with this low bar squat. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to learn more about me, please go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk. Loads more free content on there. And if you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to the same website as well and download that immediately. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.